were expected to our own, let's say, understand. I have. I cannot.
If you go by traditional Hindu conceptions, और आप ये मानते हैं that the end of the Mahabharata war effectively signified the beginning of Kali Yuga, अगर ये हमारा मानना है, then I will proceed on the basis that the Saransh of Gita is all the more applicable to the current circumstances, which is that do not be fixated on the rule, but focus on what is the end of that particular rule. Because at the end of the day, if you are completely fixated by the rule without understanding its end object, or let's say its end goal, तो रूल को तो किसी भी हालत में बचा लेंगे, लेकिन धर्म का सत्यानाश हो जाएगा. And I believe that that's exactly what we are doing today. And as Indians, we are so fixated with the book as opposed to understanding what is it that the book or the document is expected to achieve. So that objectivity and the clarity is completely missing. And I don't wish to make this point as a constitutional expert or a constitutional lawyer, because first of all, I'm not an expert. And second, to make this point as a constitutional lawyer would mean to effectively accept the rules of the constitution entirely and then argue from within. I wish to argue from outside, which is to make the point that the document has an important place, but the document cannot be the whole and soul of our identity. In any case, if the document is meant to be the whole and soul of our identity, then it must necessarily draw from our civilizational ethos, as opposed to foisting something from the outside in the name of constitutional morality. Then constitutional morality is nothing but synonymous with colonialism or coloniality of the mind. That is the basic submission that I've tried to make over and over again. Now, the point is, since this document has become such a huge presence and such a huge influence on our lives, practically every discussion about Bharatiya Sanskriti now revolves only around the constitution. Whether any practice is valid or not, whether any belief system is valid or not, whether a certain right is valid or not, everything is being tested exclusively on the anvils of this constitution. In which case, we may perhaps want to even reconsider the need for a written constitution. ऐसा नहीं है that एक लिखित संविधान होना जरूरी है, but if this is the impact of a written constitution as far as Bharat is concerned, then perhaps we must go back to the drawing board stage, where instead of a new constitution, you may want to consider an unwritten constitution. But I understand that लिखने के बावजूद इसमें अगर इतना confusion है, then the absence of a written constitution may create even more mischief and even more confusion. So therefore, redrafting this constitution, regardless of what its antecedents may be, regardless of what its intentions may be, has become absolutely imperative, because the manner in which it is being interpreted has become completely entrenched. So my limited submission is going to be that a Republic 2.0 and a Constitutional Republic 2.0 is no more an academic discussion. It has become a civilizational and existential imperative. And I'm happy that you framed this as 2030 and not 2050, because according to me, every 5 years, the fate of this particular civilization is changing and is hurtling towards its own extinction in quite a few ways, with demographic inversion and whatnot. And I don't think we'll be able to find responses and, let's say, solutions to each of these problems exclusively from within the Constitution. It's not going to be possible. And therefore, while we can continue to have a discussion on this document, I believe that we may have to look at certain response mechanisms which are not unconstitutional, but which may certainly lie outside the pale of the Constitution. This is very, very important, because I don't know how is it that we are going to deal with street veto. I don't know how is it that we are going to deal with demographic inversion, because unless and until there is some kind of a clarity and a clarification that comes about in the document, which explains what is the identity of this particular country and how is it that the country not just declares this identity, but also preserves it. And that's not going to happen unless and until there are certain limitations on rights placed on others. Unfortunately, that's a discussion that's an extremely thorny discussion. So, for instance, what Dr. Chungu has just pointed out, that if Bharat as it exists today is the product of a bloody partition on religious lines, then those identities which are responsible and which were responsible for the partition of this country cannot claim to have the same kind of right and dominion over this particular land as those who are native to this particular land. And this discussion has to happen not on constitutional lines, but on civilizational lines and on political lines and cultural lines. Constitution की बात सबसे बाद में आएगी because the constitution is a product of a societal decision and it can't be the starting point of the discussion. So perhaps this is where I would want to start the discussion, and therefore I believe that whatever Dr. Chungu has said is perfect, and maybe the work of scholars like Venkat Dhulipala, where he's written on the idea behind Pakistan, and I will be touching upon significantly on this particular aspect as part of my second book in the trilogy, where I will be covering the period significantly between, let's say, the Farezi movement in Bengal and until the realization of the idea of Pakistan in 1946. And the more I read it, I believe that minority rights and secularism is perhaps a restatement of Shah Waliullah's call to restore the supremacy of Islam in this country. And his call was to an outsider, which is Abdali. But now I believe that the call is being made to people both outside and within. And we are moving in that particular direction. If this is the realization, then the constitution should either gear up or it must at least allow the society to develop its own defense mechanisms.